Welcome to the Tech Startup Show. In this episode, we speak to renowned author, YouTuber, and entrepreneur Tiago Forte. He founded Forte Labs with the mission of answering the question, how can humans reach their creative potential? We discuss what a second brain is, four-letter frameworks, productivity tools, and the future of productivity. So let's jump straight into it. Hi, Tiago. Could you start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Business-wise, personal-wise, history. Where do you want to start?
Well, I'd love to hear a bit about your business.
Sure.
Building a Second Brain.
Yeah, Building a Second Brain started as a course that I teach. It has now become a book and a membership community and various other things. And it's kind of our flagship program for our business, which is called Forte Labs. Which is a community-centric online education company. So we teach things, we educate, we train, but specifically we train people in skills that are emerging, like frontier skills that don't have, an official textbook or a defined best practice, but are so new and innovative and sort of quickly evolving that we really have to do it in community. And so we always create a kind of a vibrant community around a topic and then teach people in the context of that community.
And what is a second brain?
Yeah. A second brain is my term for a system of knowledge management. So that's a lot of long words, but think of it as a note-taking system, right? Like the notes you take probably already on books you read, classes you take, YouTube videos you watch, maybe meetings, maybe just your own thoughts, your own journal entries, except instead of just for the moment, instead of just for the short term, that hour, that day, you're taking notes digitally in a digital format that therefore can stand the test of time. It can be useful the next day, the next week, month, years into the future in a way that notes typically are not. That whole system is what I call a second brain, because it's basically it's like an extension of your first brain, your biological mind.
Got it. And if I'm not mistaken, a large part of that is the code framework. What exactly is that?
So code are the steps. Right. So a second brain is not just a thing. It is also a method. It is a process. You can think of it as the creative process, right? The creative process to me, put very simply, is just how do you get information inputs, right, on one end, whether text you read or images you see or videos you watch, audio you listen to, people you talk to, experiences you have, and then through some series of steps, turn it into some kind of output. Whether it's like a book you write or an article you write or a presentation you give or an email you write or just a result that you produce. And that process in my methodology has 4 steps, which are the letters of code. CODE, which stand for capture, that's the C. Organize, that's the O. Distill, that's the D. And then express, which is the E, the final step.
So after reading your book, I implemented my second brain using Apple Notes and Notion. But one of the biggest struggles I had was emptying my captured notes into my second brain. What does your process for doing that look like?
Yeah, so I think it's important to separate those first 2 steps, capture from organize. And that's because it's not that easy to get things into the digital world, right? Like you have to stop what you're doing to, open up an app, type some things in there. You have to spend at least, a little bit of time taking a photo or recording a video or highlighting an article you're reading or a book. It's not completely automatic. It takes human effort. And so you don't want to force yourself to, in the same moment that you're trying to capture something, also decide what it should be called, where it should go, what it should be connected to, how it should be tagged. Like if you try to make all those decisions in the moment, when you're like trying to get something done and busy, you're going to end up just skipping the whole thing. Oh, I don't have time for this. Right. And so I'd say the first step is to separate them. Just capture it. Just dump it in an inbox. That's why inboxes are so powerful and valuable, is you just dump stuff in there, don't have to think about it. And then at a separate time and place, such as at the end of the day, end of the week, or once every couple weeks, or once a month, whatever it is that makes sense for you, you sit down and all in one batch, like in one big group, you just process those notes, right? And that can include typically like 3 things I usually look at. What should it be called? Where should it go? And what should it be connected to? Are like 3 questions you can ask to make sure it's been fully digested into your second brain.
And how do those questions fit in with the PARA framework, the projects, actions, resources,
areas,
archive,
projects,
right?
Areas, resources, archives.
Areas.
Yes, I'm a big fan of 4-letter frameworks. But PARA actually sits under code. So code is the top level, 4-part methodology. And then within the O, like under just organize, PARA is the method that I recommend, the technique I recommend for how to organize your digital world.
Okay. So we've got the capture part, and then we've got organize, and then what are the 2 next steps?
The 2 final ones, which are the ones people often forget in this world of digital content. The point is not just to collect. This isn't about being, a digital hoarder, just accumulating piles and piles, gigabytes, terabytes after terabytes of stuff. The point is to have an impact on someone or something outside of yourself. And so what the second and final, the last and final 2 steps are about is distilling what you've gathered. That's the D, right? This is the single step that people most miss, is having 10 pages of notes isn't very valuable. You have to go through and really distill them, summarize them. What are the key points? What are the key ideas or key frameworks or key conclusions or assertions or just useful observations that you want to actually extract and use? You want to utilize them in your own work, right? The process of distilling is just identifying what those are. And then expressing, the E, is about actually doing that final leap that is always so scary for most of us, which is to actually deliver them, whether it's the message that you want to tell to someone, whether it's a presentation you're giving to your team, maybe it's a piece of writing you're doing, maybe it's a song or a dance. Like the form of self-expression is extremely diverse and looks different for every single person. But the need to self-express, I believe, is crucial, is pivotal for every single human. As humans, we have the need to express ourselves in some way. And a second brain is simply a way to do that more easily and with more joy and with more efficiency.
And how would you recommend people express themselves, practically speaking?
I mean, there's so many ways, but to me, I like to think of it almost like an engineer. My process of self-expression is just getting those inputs that I've captured, organized, and distilled, and just turning them into some sort of tangible artifact. That's the important part, is that it's something that I can actually create and then share with someone. So I guess for me personally, that usually means like a piece of writing, like a blog post, or it means like another piece of media, like a YouTube video or podcast episode or an interview like this one, or it means a slide presentation or a consulting gig, or a keynote that I give at a conference. Even for one person, there can be many kinds of self-expression, but for me, it's usually some sort of message or a piece of content.
And how do you plan the content you create as a content creator? How do you stay consistent?
It's funny. I'm not really that consistent. The most direct answer is I follow my curiosity. I really have an inability to do creative work that I'm not passionate about, like right in that moment. I find it just impossible to force myself to do things. And so what I tend to instead have is like a whole array of interests at any given time. Like this is the funny thing is we're told to focus. Oh, just do one thing, like focus on the one most important thing. I find that doesn't work at all for me. I need like 12 things. And as my curiosity changes, I'll go this direction, and then I'll get bored and move towards a different one, and then kind of lose interest or get tired of it, move it to a different one. So I'm constantly pushing forward, probably about a dozen, like 12 to 15 different projects. And as long as I'm just working on something, as long as I'm adding value somewhere, I just find it's like planting seeds. It's like a garden that I'm planting all sorts of different seeds. They're going to germinate and blossom at different times and pretty unpredictably. Some might take just a week to blossom. Another might take months. But as long as I keep planting seeds, they keep sprouting and yielding fruit on a fairly regular, sort of consistent basis. But I don't have any kind of like, oh, every week I have to publish a blog post or anything like that. I find that really kind of destroys my creative flame.
And diving a bit into Forte Labs, your business, what did that journey look like? What inspired you to get started with Forte Labs?
It was a long journey, mostly unplanned. It started actually in 2013 when I just rage quit I had a consulting job at the time for a small consulting firm in San Francisco. And I had no plan, definitely no desire or inkling to, start a business, had no savings. I think I had like a month of savings in the bank. San Francisco is an expensive city. So I just rage quit, and then I just started doing little projects, little gigs. At first I thought, okay, let me just try to, do one little project for this month of savings that I have before I get another job. And I just started doing little things like doing some freelance writing, created my first little online course, did some consulting, did some productivity coaching. And for probably 2 or 3 years, just barely held on, just barely strung together. Like every month it was just like, okay, how am I going to make this month's rent? Okay, next month's rent. Okay, next month's rent. It was just 1 month at a time for like a good 2 or 3 years, honestly. And then finally I started to just piece together enough of those gigs to start to think about the long term. And I saw once I was able to do that, I saw that I wanted to build an asset. I didn't want to keep trading my time for money, as they say. Coaching and consulting can be profitable. You can get paid a lot of money per hour, but you're still having to be there yourself doing the thing, right? And I just started noticing people would build assets that then ran on their own, and then they could step away and do other things or just, not work as much. When I looked at the different assets that could be created, the one that seemed to fit my skills the most was courses, right? I had been a teacher. I had been an English teacher overseas, had taught a few other things over the course of my life. I was kind of a natural teacher. And so I created my first course. And then a second one, which kind of was building a second brain, the one that really kind of blew up. And that was really the first moment, probably 4 or 5 years in, that I first started thinking like, oh, this could really be a business. Like I could really do this forever. I could never have to get a job. I could actually make a real living out of this and even hire a team. Like really all of that thinking came much, much, much later. It was really years of just wandering in the desert, trying to stay independent and free. That was my journey.
And what was that transition of going from you just working on your own courses to transitioning into a full business?
It's really funny for me to look back because, in retrospect, and probably for anyone listening to this, they're like, obviously it was a business. Like, obviously, like, why not? What's the problem? But I don't know why that was just so intimidating to me. And in fact, I think if I had, quit my consulting job with the idea, oh, I'm going to start a business, I think I would have given up immediately, because that reality of a profitable, sustainable business was so far from my reality, right? It's like when you're scrounging together pennies to make this month's rent, the idea of like a company where you think of like an office building and, lots of people, like teams and, a cool logo and all these things is just like, that's like a different dimension. It's like a different universe. And so I just went through different phases. But the transition itself, I think, came I mean, practically it came when I started making more money than I strictly needed. Like, obviously that's an important part of it, right? And that happened pretty fast. That's the thing. Like, for those 4 or 5 years, most of them, I was making less money each year than I could have made at a job, right? Like, much less. So it's underpaid, 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 underpaid. But then in just the span of a year or two, there was an inflection point. And because I wasn't trading my time for money, because it's a course, I could quickly scale from being underpaid to being paid more than I could make at a job, right? It was like a pretty quick transition. And that happened really mostly because of the pandemic. You know, it wasn't some extraordinary effort that I put in, wasn't some brilliant business strategy. It was just the entire world was stuck at home with nothing to do in the beginning of 2020. And that fueled the growth of online education tremendously. We just had much less competition. People had money to spend in the US because of their stimulus checks. So the financial inflection point happened at the beginning of 2020. And that's the first time that I was even able to consider, oh, well, what should I do with this surplus revenue? And I thought, well, I could just work less, but I quite love what I do. So don't really want to do that. I could just save it, you know, for a rainy day. But then the opportunity in front of me started to become so enticing, right, that I didn't want to just stick it in a low interest savings account. I wanted to invest it, right? I wanted to build those finances. I could invest it in the stock market, but then I thought, why not just invest it in myself? And what that looked like ultimately was was beginning at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020 to hire our first team. And then we just hired one person at a time after that, to the point that today we have about 7 full-time people, and that's the business.
So you have a YouTube channel, you have your courses. What are your biggest projects aside from those as a part of Forte Labs?
Yeah, I do like to think in terms of projects. It's probably no surprise. So our biggest projects, let's see, are probably running the course. So our course is different from most others. It's not, so we have a self-paced course where you sign up, get access to the whole curriculum all at once. But the flagship program, which is the main one that I've been doing for the past 5-6 years, is a cohort-based course, it's called, which is live. Right. So it's not this pre-recorded set of videos. It's actually, you get on a set of Zoom calls with me, or now with our, facilitators, our instructors, and you learn from them live. It's kind of like a classroom. It's like a university. And therefore it's a big project every time. We have to launch it. We have to plan and redesign all the live sessions. We have to send out emails at certain times. We have to, we interact and coach people and give them feedback through the discussion forum. It's more it's almost like running a conference more than just like a self-paced course. So that's one. I'd say the other major projects are creating new pieces of content or creating new products, right? When we launched our self-paced course a few months ago, that was a good 2-month lift, right? To find all the different scripts and outlines, make them into videos, put those videos into a curriculum. Booting up our YouTube channel last year was a big project, right? We were on YouTube, but very inactive. We just had maybe 20,000 subscribers. So to take that to an active, engaged, growing channel was this big, heavy lift. I had to hire a YouTube manager, build a studio in my garage, which is the one you see here, hire a bunch of contractors for different specialized tasks, completely change the look and feel of our channel. All of that is a massive project. That is generally how I tend to think, is a short-term sprint to get to a particular outcome, and then you're finished, and then you can say, oh, okay, we did it. What's next? I kind of like to think of the year as a series of short sprints.
And what are your future plans with Forte Labs?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just keep growing. Growth is always, pretty good direction to go in. Our mission is to enable anyone in the world to build a second brain. So far, up until today, we've reached mostly, pretty well paid, highly educated, kind of first world knowledge workers. But with the release of my book back in June, which is on its way to being translated to like 27 different languages, we're now kind of trying to democratize and spread that knowledge, which has been around for a long time, but mostly, like I said, like in elite Silicon Valley circles, trying to spread it to the entire world. I really think that this practice of knowledge management should be just as important as things like reading, writing, note taking, to people's lives, to their health, their productivity, their income, their relationships. I'm trying to make this esoteric practice of knowledge management something that everyone knows about and that everyone can take advantage of.
I guess quite a big question, but diving into some of the productivity tools you use and would recommend, what tools would you recommend for building a second brain?
Yeah, so that's a good framing, which is that a common misconception people have is, oh, they think my second brain, that sounds like one thing, which, by the way, even your first brain is not one thing, right? It has two hemispheres. It has different regions and lobes and structures, even inside our biological brain. Your second brain is really an ecosystem of apps. Think of it not as a single tool, but as a toolkit, right? And that's because we have to use different specialized pieces of software for different tasks, right? If you're keeping track of your agenda, you should use a calendar, right? A calendar is built for that job. If you're keeping a to-do list, use a to-do list app, also known as a task manager. It is specialized. It's purpose-built for that task. Likewise, you can use digital notes if it's just like free-form, open-ended content, pieces of text, images, links, things like that. But if you have video, that needs to be stored in a video, management software. If you have photos, that should be in a photo management app. And so really, your second brain is more like the system of how all those tools work together, right? Like, how do they relate to each other? How do they complement each other instead of interfering with each other, and actually become more than the sum of their parts, and not just, just random collection of apps that I use. And so, I can speak to the ones that I use. The ones I recommend really depend on your personality, your temperament, your use case, how you use them, what you're going to use them for. But I tend to use, so the ones that I use are Things, which is a task manager, to-do list app for the Mac. I've been using all of these actually for something like 10 years. I tend to be a late adopter. I don't like to adopt the latest technology because it's usually very buggy and kind of full of problems. I like to wait until it's like 5 to 10 years old, and then I'll adopt it. So I use Things as my task manager, Evernote for my digital notes app, BusyCal for my calendar app, Google Drive for my cloud storage, which is also where I do my writing in Google Docs. And then we, as a team, we have different apps that we use for the team, such as Loom for communicating, like voiceover walkthroughs of different screens. We use ClickUp for collaborative projects, like for things where people need to coordinate their actions. We use ClickUp. Let's see what else. Notion for kind of free-form knowledge that is also shared among the team is a great use case for Notion. Those are half a dozen of the different software programs that I use.
And you mentioned there are different personality types and different people are best suited to different tools. And I saw one of your videos talking about 3 of the common types of note takers. Could you elaborate a bit on that and what tools are better for which types?
Sure. Yeah, there's 4. In my framework, there's 4. Always 4.
4.
Yes. So we have developed this framework that really is almost like a personality quiz for note taking, right? So if you've ever taken like a personality test where you answer some questions and it says, oh, you are this type, and kind of tells you some advice or some characteristics based on that type. And the 4 types are architect, gardener, librarian, and student. I can briefly go through those if you want, but they basically describe kind of your default way that you approach information, all kinds of information. And it's probably ingrained. It's probably like you were born this way. It tends to be just natural to the way that your mind works. It's not really something you choose. But knowing that, you can kind of choose the software program that best suits how your mind works.
And I'd love to, if you could dive into a few of those a bit more.
The architect, think of the person who wants to create, who really likes to see the bird's eye view, right? It's like if they're going to go on vacation, they're going to plan the whole itinerary from beginning to end and probably every step in between. They need to know the plan. They're always asking things like, what's the big picture? Or what are we really trying to accomplish here? They're like top-down holistic thinkers. The architect typically likes to use apps like Notion, right? Like Notion, or another one is Craft or Coda, are apps that kind of have you architect a page, right? Like what are the sections? What are the blocks? What are the databases and things like that? Gardener is the complete opposite. So gardeners, they don't really need to know the plan or the big picture. They like to just kind of dive in and just get their hands dirty, right? So these are people that just like to go on vacation. They just, buy a plane ticket, show up in the country, and they're like, okay, like let's see what's happening. Like just dive in and kind of figure stuff out as you go along. And they tend to, there's actually a new category of second brain apps, such as Roam and Obsidian and Logseek, that are a great fit for this type, because you don't really need to have like structure and folders and different things. You just kind of go in and start adding ideas and then just kind of link them together as you go along. The third type is librarian. This is kind of like the classic. You're trying to just like document knowledge in a straightforward, simple way for future reference. I tend to be a librarian type. I think of my second brain as a library, and that personality is best suited to apps like Evernote, or another one would be like Microsoft OneNote, that are kind of like almost like the classic paradigm of storing content digitally. And then finally, the student is kind of for everyone who doesn't see themselves in any of the other three. Tends to be people who are early in their journey, whether they're literal students in school or university or not, that doesn't matter. You can be a student at any point in life, but it's someone who's just getting started, or perhaps their note-taking needs are very simple, or they're only like for a short-term thing, like for taking one class or reading one book or graduating from school or something like that. Tends to be someone who has simpler needs, doesn't really want so much sophistication and complexity. And they tend to go for really like the default kind of built-in note-taking apps on our devices, like Apple Notes or Google Keep, or just the text app that comes on your computer.
A very big question. What do you think the future of productivity tools looks like?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the AI era now, aren't we? I mean, just it's been 15, 16 weeks since ChatGPT was released. I mean, I would have answered this just a few months ago differently than I do today. Up until a few months ago, AI was not very impressive. It was not anything, I think, approaching what you can legitimately call artificial intelligence. But now, I mean, it's clear. What I can say is this: it's clearly going to replace major parts of the creative process. Right. In fact, it's probably going to transform all 4 of the steps of code. Capture will be much easier and seamless, or maybe even completely automatic. Organize might be largely done for us, right? Or it may be completely unnecessary because the AI will just like ingest all that data and then just tell us what it means. Distilling will be so much easier. Now you can just say, instead of going through and highlighting or manually identifying the key points, you can just ask an AI, what are the distilled key points? And even expression. In fact, expression most of all, with the beautiful imagery we're seeing, the video, and even now music that's being created, all 4 steps are going to be transformed. What I will say, though, is all 4 steps will remain, right? They will still exist and still be necessary in some way or another. It's just that certain parts of them will be increasingly taken over by machines, which I'm hoping, which I believe will really free us. Really, it'll be a blessing because it will free humans from so much of the drudgery of information work, because so much of it is drudgery. So much of it is so mind numbing. Hopefully we can delegate that to the machines and therefore dedicate ourselves to things that are more subtle, more complex, more human, more empathetic. That is my optimistic take of the future of productivity tools, is basically this new future that AI is taking us into.
That's very interesting, particularly the fact that the code framework will still be there. So what are your thoughts on some of the best tools integrating AI to improve productivity, whether it be improving the code framework or other areas of productivity?
Yeah, I'm just starting to get into really the nitty gritty. I just in the past week subscribed to like a dozen AI newsletters. And actually across all social media, I'm starting to like follow and subscribe and, like content from AI content creators to try to get the algorithms to give me more of it. And so the only ones I can really specifically reference are ChatGPT itself. It's kind of the big one, right? It's just incredibly powerful. If you need something rewritten, if you're trying to come up with some ideas for, a way of approaching a problem, if you're trying to explain something more clearly or simply or in a more succinct way, all of those are incredible use cases to just dump some text or put a prompt into ChatGPT and save, potentially hours of your own effort in seconds or minutes. That's one. Another one is Notion AI, which recently released just a couple weeks ago. I'm a Notion user, so it's so powerful. Recently, I had some book notes, probably 10,000 words that I'd saved in highlights from a book. And instead of going through and meticulously, adding bullet points and headings and subheadings and the different sections, I just dumped it into Notion AI and said, please organize this for me. And it spat out a very clean, organized, it kind of read the text and put it into headings and subheadings in a way that was perfectly suited to my needs. And that's built right into the tool, one of the tools for knowledge management that I'm already using. I didn't even have to go over to ChatGPT and paste anything. And then the last one is Lex. Are you familiar with Lex? It's an AI writing tool. So it's created by a company called E13. And think of it like Google Docs. You know how Google Docs will sort of suggest a line for you? Like as you're writing, it will say, oh, do you want to write this? And then you just do, I think it's the right arrow key and it just completes. It's like that, but better. It's almost like supercharged where you can actually just say, write the whole next sentence for me, write the whole next paragraph. In fact, I think they have a new feature called First Draft where you can say, you know what? It's really hard to start writing on a blank page. Just write the first draft for me. Here's the topic. Please include these points. Go for it. And it just does it. And then you're almost like collaborating and going back and forth with the AI tool rather than just sitting there trying to come up with all the ideas yourself. Those are probably the three tools that I use the most.
And what are your thoughts on daily planners as an alternative to to-do lists?
Daily planners, what do you mean? You mean like bullet journal kind of stuff?
Like tools like Sunsama, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, or other tools that allow you to take your tasks and then block them in the calendar directly.
So I think of the calendar as a completely separate tool as the to-do list. I see what you're getting at. Some people kind of combine them, right? If they have a task, oh, I want to do this task, they'll actually just block it off in their calendar, right? And I see the value in that. And sometimes I do have to do that. Usually if there's a task that I'm dreading, like actually there's one right now, I have to call the tax agency for my state and probably be on hold for 2 hours to finally talk to someone. I've been dreading that for weeks. So that probably means I need to put it on my calendar, block off 2 hours and say, call tax agency. But typically, normally, I don't like to put something on the calendar unless it really has to be done at that time, right? I think you can over time block. You can schedule out meticulously your whole day in 15-minute chunks. But to me, that causes me to wake up in the morning, look at this list and just be like, oh God, it's too structured and rigid. It's too confining. I feel kind of suffocated. I like my day to be mostly free to just, like I said, follow my curiosity, whatever is calling to me. Maybe I have one or two calls that have to happen at specific times. But generally, I want as large and open of blocks of times that I can have on my calendar. So I tend to essentially put things that have to happen only at a specific time on my calendar and everything else on my to-do list.
So you mentioned you use Things 3 as your to-do list. What is your process of, at the beginning of each day, deciding what you want to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. To me, it is not really a daily thing. It's a weekly thing. So typically once a week, I do a weekly review. And the purpose of the weekly review is to identify what do I want to get done this week. That's like really the only purpose of the whole thing. So that requires me to do a few things. Like I have to clear my email inbox because there could be some, open loops, as they're known, lingering in my email. It requires me to look at my calendar, requires me to look at last week's to-do list, requires me to look at any files that have accumulated on my computer desktop. Like there's a few places I have to look. But usually it takes me maybe 20 or 30 minutes to do my weekly review. And what I'm left with is a to-do list, which is like 10 to 20 items long that I'm going to sort of chip away at over the course of a week, right? I'm definitely not going to wake up Monday morning and get 10 to 20 things done. That would be wildly ambitious. Usually in a given day, I'm going to get like 2 or 3 things done at most. And so over the course of the week, that's what I'll do. Monday, 2 or 3 things done. Tuesday, 2 or 3 things. Wednesday, 2 or 3 things. And I think the reason for that is my to-do list is a list of obligations, right? It's a list of have to-dos. So I don't want to spend all my time or even most of my time doing things that I'm obligated to do. That just kills my spirit. That really, drags me into depression. Instead, I want to spend the great majority of my time doing things I want to do, things that are interesting and creative and life-giving. And then I'll dedicate 10 or 15% of my time to get done those 2 or 3 things. The fewest things that I can get away with as late as possible, as little as possible. I'm trying to really minimize that category of things in my life. And therefore, it really takes me the whole week. And even then, I won't get done all those 10 to 20 things. I'll get done like half of them. Right? I'll get done out of the 10, let's say I have 20 things, I'll get done the 10 that are the most important, right? And then the next week I look at the remaining 10 and I realize, 2 or 3 or 4 of those things I actually didn't need to do. Another 2 or 3 just kind of became obsolete, became irrelevant. And then there's like 2 or 3 that I have to carry over into the following week.
And final question, where can people connect with you or support you?
Sure. So you can find everything that I'm working on at buildingasecondbrain.com. My book is there, my courses, my podcasts. We have a lot of free content, such as on the blog. It can all be found at buildingasecondbrain.com.
Awesome. And we'll put all those links in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Tiago. This has been so interesting to dive into the world of productivity and the 4-letter frameworks. It's
absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you, Charles.